Hello, this is Jennifer, and as always, I'm very thankful you're here. Now, a few days ago, I went live and I shared a new technique. It's a spinning easel card. Now, you could skip the spinning element and just have a floating frame easel card. Really fun to do and a great way to stretch your products. I do encourage you to catch that replay. I'll put a link to it up here on the top right and in the description below because you'll learn more about this technique. In this video, I'm building on that technique and sharing additional card examples. So this is all about stretching your product and making an interactive card that is really different than something you would buy in the store. And if you're not into cards like this, definitely stick around because I'm sharing different techniques on stretching some of your supplies that could apply to everyone. Before we get started, let's look at this card. This is kind of what I did in my last live video. So you have this little spinning element that you wind up before you put it into the envelope. Then when the recipient takes it out of the envelope and pulls the card open, that element will spin. And then you can also prop up the front of the card as an easel card. So this stands great on display. I've done many easel card videos in the past. However, this one's different because the part that props up is actually see-through. So you can see through it completely, but you still will have a place to write your personal message inside. In that live, I showed how you can use different plates to create an impression, to hot foil, to do a better press, lots of different options, all about stretching your supplies. So be sure to check that out. But let's get started with new cards today. This is the first card I'll do. It's a little bit bigger and has a big spinning element, but it also has lots of other fun techniques incorporated. Now this card is a bit bigger because I wanted to have a big spinning element in the center. So I have a piece of light blue cardstock here that is 4 3/4 inches by 6 inches. And I'm using a large Spellbinders stylish oval die to cut from it. Now over there on the left, I have the largest oval in the set. The one that I'm cutting on my cardstock is the second largest, so it's slightly smaller. Next, I have a piece of white cardstock that's a bit bigger than the blue one. This one is 5 by 6 1/4 inches. I'm putting my blue piece right in the center of it and holding it there and taking the same die and popping it into the opening and then running this through my die cut machine. This will place an oval right at the center of that bigger white cardstock piece. By the way, I chose these size pieces of cardstock because it worked well with these large ovals, but you could use whatever size you prefer. Next up, I'm creating the piece that will be the front of our easel card. So this piece here is 5 by 8 1/2, and I scored it at 6 1/4. You'll understand why I'm doing this in a moment. Just give me some time. I promise it'll make sense. Onto the front of that, I'm placing our white die cut piece, lining up the front underneath that score line, and once again, popping the oval die into the opening and running it through my die cut machine. So by lining these up and popping the die cuts into the opening, or the die into the opening, I can be sure that the oval is in the same place on all these layers and it'll line up when I put it all together. So the piece that we just cut with the flap on the top will actually be the front of the card. The reason I had to do the front and the back separately is because I'm making a bigger card and I couldn't create a piece of folded cardstock big enough. But that, again, that'll make sense in a moment. Just bear with me. For a little decorative edge on the front piece, which is the blue one, I created a darker blue oval by using the largest oval die and then the slightly smaller oval die that I used to create the window. I die cut those together and I get this thin frame, which I'm gluing onto that lighter blue piece. This definitely could be skipped, but it gives a little decorative finish. Also, it gives a little more stability to this open window. Now I'll flip that blue window over, and on the back, we're going to stretch a piece of thread. You can use clear thread, but I thought it'd be easier to use white thread so you could see it in the video. Up at the top, I'm using a piece of tape to adhere it. Then I'll stretch it to go to the bottom and put a piece of tape there. Now you could use double-sided tape, something strong, really doesn't matter. I just thought this would be easiest. Now I really want to make sure that doesn't come undone. So what I like to do is before I cut the excess off, I will take another piece of tape and fold that string back on itself. So watch, I'm folding it back and putting another piece of tape down. That way it's really secured there. And I'll do the same thing at the top. So no matter what shape window you have here, you're just going to want to stretch your thread from the top to the bottom as tight as you can. Then you can put adhesive on the back of that. Make sure you get some adhesive around that thread just to better secure it, and place that onto our slightly bigger white frame. This will give us that thread sandwich between the 2 layers, but also will give the frame more stability. By making it 2 layers thick, you got the white and the blue, it'll stand up nice and strong on display. Next, we can create the spinning element. Anything symmetrical would work well here. I thought this was an absolutely beautiful collection from Pinkfresh called Garden Tapestry. Now, in this collection, there is a stamp set, coordinating die, coordinating stencils, and a coordinating better press plate. Now, all of these are sold separately, so you can pick and choose and use them as you prefer. You could definitely use this stamp for what I'm doing today, but I used the press plate. And keep in mind, you can foil with that press plate. I'll show you the result of that in a moment. Or you can make an impression with an embossing mat. So if you want to learn about the different things you can do with a press plate, check out the live that I did that I mentioned earlier. I'll have that linked above and below. I chose to use the press plate with the Better Press system. I like to put a piece of really thin scrap packaging. This is actually from a sleeve that a stencil came in. I like to put that down first so I don't get that gray matte inky, and that way I don't have to clean it. So I put my press plate down into that center area. And then I am taping a piece of light blue cardstock to the back side of this clear plate that will go on top. Next, I'll ink it with Pinkfresh Die Ink. This is the Atlantis color. I find you can use a lot of different inks for this process, and the Pinkfresh Die Inks work great. This color is a beautiful one. All right, once I've inked it up, I'll take the clear plate and pop it on top of the platform. There are magnets at the top and the bottom, which just pop it there and allow it to kind of float above. Then I run it through my Spellbinders die cut machine. It works with a few different machines, and that will give you the pressure, which will give you a slight impression, but also give you a detailed ink result. Look how beautiful that is. I'm crazy about it, and I love that it's more detail than you can get with the stamp. Now for this technique, we'll need to do this twice, so we have 2 pieces that are the same. Then I can use the stencils to color these in. I'm going to kind of speed through this because it's very basic. These stencils line up very easily and allow you to color it quickly, but you could also color it with markers. I'm choosing to use some blue colors from Pinkfresh. I really like Pinkfresh inks because they're very happy, and this blue collection just has won my heart. So first up, I'll use the Paradise and just quickly apply that over the first stencil. And remember that I'm doing this to the 2 different pieces. Now in this set of 4 blue inks, the darkest was the Atlantis that I used for the outline. So I'm using the different blues from that collection. For the second stencil, I used the turquoise color, which is a little bit lighter. And then for the third stencil, I will use key lime, which is my favorite green. And I love to do colors on light colors of cardstock. So you can do green on this light pool cardstock. It kind of changes the ink color a bit, but it is absolutely beautiful. And then olive, which is a bit darker for the final layer. So I did the same thing on both of those pieces, super quick coloring, and now we're ready to die cut these. So the coordinating die lines up with the press plate that I use, but it also lines up with the stamp if you prefer to use that. All right, so now we can add these 2 elements to the thread so that it spins. I like to put one behind the thread and one on front of the thread so that I sandwich the thread between. Now you could use whatever adhesive you want here. I like to put a little bit of Scotch tape at the top and the bottom of that die cut, making sure the thread goes right down the center. Then I like to cover the entire back with some strong liquid adhesive and place the other die cut on top of it. Now this is where it's your advantage to have an element that is symmetrical. So you can put the 2 die cuts back to back and they'll line up. If you have an image you want to spin, but it's not symmetrical, I recommend putting on maybe a circle die. So put your like critter or whatever on a circle die, and that circle die will be symmetrical, and you can have that be the spinning element. Now let's go back to our card front. Remember, that's the one with the window opening and the flap at the top. We need to score halfway on the front of this card. So that score line, remember, was at 6¼ inches. So halfway would be 3 1/8. So I'll do a score line on both sides of the frame at 3 1/8. That way I can fold the front of our card in half. And this is what creates that easel. Now, if this isn't making sense yet, I promise, stick with me. It will in a moment. Now I like to cut the flap at an angle, so right from the score line to the end, I just do a little angle there. It just comes together better, but you can skip that if you want. Now I'll put adhesive on the back of that flap and then adhere that to the top back of a piece of white cardstock that is 5 by 6¼ inches. This will be the back of our card. So the reason I had to glue 2 pieces together to create the card is this is a taller card and I didn't have a piece of cardstock long enough to fold in half and be that size. So I kind of had to make my own by attaching that front onto the back. Now we have that little flap on the back, so I chose to cut another piece of cardstock to be 5 by 6¼ inches, and I'll glue that on the back just to hide that flap. You definitely could skip that if you prefer. But now we have our easel card that is 6¼ inches tall by 5 inches wide. And by the way, I'll put this in a 5 by 7 envelope. Onto the front of our card below our fold line, just at the bottom of this frame, the bottom half of this frame, I'm putting some strong adhesive, and then we can line up our spinning frame. So this is just glued on the bottom half below that fold line. That way, when the person props it up, it'll stand up like an easel, which you'll see in a moment. For a sentiment, I'm using the Pinkfresh Happy Vibes stamp set and coordinating dies. I really, really like the style of these sentiments and that they are unique sentiments. So it's something that I'll reach for often and I use on all of today's cards. So I stamped the Love You, Miss You with black ink on white cardstock and die cut it. And then I did 2 extra die cuts to glue behind it so it has some stack dimension. And I'm gluing that right onto the front of my spinning element. If you want to, you can put another sentiment on the other side, maybe a different sentiment, but I decided to leave it blank for this one. Now the problem with the card so far is you can see through the front, right? So if I were to write a message in there, you would see it through that frame around our spinning element. So I'm creating a mini card to go on the inside so we can have a hidden message. I wanted to add a little texture to the front of that mini note card. You can kind of see it there on the white. I will be using a press plate like I did before. It's the same type of press plate. However, this time I'm not using the Better Press system. I'm using that press plate to make an impression with an embossing mat. So this is the Pinkfresh Dotted Petals press plate. Normally you use it with your Better Press system, but I have my die cut machine set up with the embossing mat, which is that flexible mat that most die cut machines come with. This will allow me to make a deep, deep impression with the press plate. You can also do this with foil plates, which we demonstrate later on in this video. I have a 4 1/4 by 5½ inch top folding white note card. I laid it open onto that embossing mat and put the press plate on top and ran it through my die cut machine. The sandwich that I'm using is the same one that the instruction manual says to do to make an impression with a die or dry emboss with a die, but instead I'm using that press plate. And look at this beautiful result. It gives you as much dimension as an embossing folder, but with much more detail to it. Absolutely gorgeous and a great way to stretch those press plates. I'll put adhesive on the back of this mini card and put it inside of our bigger card. So again, the bigger card is 5 by 6 1/4. This mini card is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. The last thing we need to do is to put a little sentiment right there at the center of that mini note card. I stacked die cuts again, so this has some dimension, and I'll put it right in the center. When the card is closed, then you won't see this sentiment. But when you open it up, the recipient can prop the bottom of the easel against it so it'll stand up on display. So before I give this card to someone, I like to wind up the spinning element. Just wind it up a bunch of times. Then I put it in the envelope. That way, then when they take it out of the envelope, you'll see that the element will spin, which is really fun. And again, I used a 5 by 7 envelope here. I'll link to my favorite source for those below in the description. All right, so when the recipient takes it out and opens it, you can see it spins. and you can see the sentiment inside serves as a little hidden sentiment and a place to prop up that easel card. The mini card inside opens up so you can write your personal message there too, which is always important on a card. I did add a few glitter drops. These are from Pinkfresh Studio. These are clear gems with colored glitter on the inside, and they're just a great way to add the sparkle of glitter without the mess of glitter. Before we move on, I wanted to point out one thing. With this card, I showed you how to use a press plate with a better press system. I also showed you how to use a press plate with an embossing mat to make a deep impression. But I mentioned you can also use a press plate with a glimmer foil machine or other foil machine to get incredible detailed foil results. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate that today, but I did want to show you what this particular press plate looks like when you foil with it. Look at that gorgeous shiny detail. If you want to learn how to foil with a press plate, be sure to check out that live that I mentioned, and I have linked here. I demonstrate how to do that there. It works great every time. My next example is another easel card with an open frame. This one doesn't have a spinning element, but you could change it up if you wanted to. I just wanted to show you the different options. I also have a few other techniques to share with this one. For this one, I'll be using the new Pinkfresh Studio Lanterns collection. So for this one, there is a stamp set, coordinating dies, coordinating stencils, and a hot foil plate. And once again, these are all sold separately, so you can pick and choose. I decided to do the stamp, and I stamped that with black ink and heat set it, and I'm using the coordinating stencils to color it in. I am doing 2 of each of these because I want to have a flower element at the top of my card and at the bottom, but I'm only creating one of the lanterns. I am again using key lime ink, which is my favorite green, and then along the bottom of the leaves, kind of where the stem is, I'm applying the turquoise ink, and I'll add those colors also for the lantern. So I'm using the same blues and greens I used earlier. Now you can see these elements line up really nicely, and it also allows you to create a little candle that you can add to your lantern if you want to. Because this inking and stenciling is very straightforward, I'm not going to show all of it, but I did want to mention for the flowers, I use mimosa with a little bit of the darker fruit punch. And then for the smaller flowers, I use sweet mustard, which is a great yellow. Then there is a coordinating die that easily cuts out all 3 of these images at once, which is a huge time saver. So I ended up with 2 of the floral images and 1 of the lanterns and 1 of the candle. I'll flip that little lantern over and glue the candle in the back there. I will add a little bit more behind that lantern, but I'll do that a bit later. I did put a bit of orange at the base of the flame just to make it stand out more. And then I didn't get enough variation in the color on my flowers, so I'm coming in with a Copic marker and adding a bit of red at the base for some more contrast. All right, now to create the frame for our easel card, I have a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I also grabbed a rectangle frame to create an opening there at the center. After I've cut it from that piece of white cardstock, I will take another piece of white cardstock of the same size and put it right behind it. Notice I left the die in the opening so that when I line up the edges of these cardstock pieces, then that die will cut through that back piece of cardstock in the same spot. Then we have a note card of the same size. This is top folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I'm lining up one of my frames on the front of that note card. Pop that die back in place and run that through our die cut machine. So now we have that same rectangle opening in the same position on 2 pieces of white cardstock and on the front of our note card. Now for one of these frames that'll be on the front, I wanted to add some color and texture. And I thought I'd show you how you can add some texture using a foil plate without a foil machine. So let me show you. I have this incredible hot foil plate set from Pinkfresh Studio. There are 2 plates included. Now this is not available for sale. It's actually free with any purchase of $50 or more while supplies last. So when this video comes out, it'll be available for a bit. You can find information on how to get this free in the description below. But I know not everybody has a foil machine to use a foil plate, so I thought I'd show you how you can use these without a foil machine, and the results are spectacular. So you're going to set up your die cut machine again with that flexible embossing mat, following the sandwich to make an impression or dry emboss with a die. But this time we'll use the foil plate. So we have that flexible mat, one of our cardstock frames. I did mist it with a bit of water first so we get a good impression. Then I put the foil plate down and finish off the sandwich according to the instruction manual. And when I run it through, check out the deep, deep impression that you get with a foil plate and that embossing mat. It's absolutely gorgeous, and once again, it's as deep of an impression as you would get with an embossing folder, but with much more detail. Absolutely gorgeous. So I decided to trim a little bit off of all 4 sides of this, and then I will heat set it. Remember, I misted it with a bit of water. I want it to be dry before we add any ink on top. By the way, I'm cutting a little bit off all 4 sides just so we will have a bit of a mat around this when we add it to our other frame. Okay, so now over this, I'm applying some ink. I could have used color cardstock, but I thought I'd show you how you can use the same ink color that you use for your stamping to do a frame that matches. So I'm using Waterfall, which is from that same blue ink collection that I've been using throughout this video. And I'm covering that textured frame with that Waterfall ink. Then I have white pigment ink and a brayer. This is a Holtz Brayer, and I'm just lightly rolling white pigment ink over this. This white pigment ink will only go on the raised areas, giving it a softer look. And then the deeper areas will stay the darker blue. I like to take a dry cloth and kind of buff that so it kind of blends in a bit, and the result is beautiful. So this shows you can make an impression with not only a die or a press plate, but even with a hot foil plate. Okay, so now I'm going to heat set that because remember we used white ink and I don't want any of that to smear. Now I can add my little flower elements. I want to have one kind of peeking out from the top left and one down towards the bottom right of our frame opening. And I can also add our little lantern hanging from the top. You could definitely have made this so that the lantern spins, but I wanted to show you a non-spinning version. When I was done, I put glue all over the back of the frame and I'm adding it to our other white frame piece that we created earlier. Now let's put this together into an easel card. We have our note card where we created the opening at the center. We need to score this halfway on the front of the card. Since this is 5.5 inches tall, I'm scoring at 2 3/4 of an inch, and that will give us a fold line right there at the center. And this again is what forms our easel. I'll put strong adhesive below that fold line that we just created and then add our frame to the front. At this point, my lantern is see-through, and I wanted to block off the back of it so I can hide a sentiment behind it. So I cut a piece of small white cardstock, and then I put some yellow ink on it, and I'm going to glue that to the back of our lantern. This will make the lantern solid so that I can put a small die cut that will serve 2 purposes. It'll be a sentiment on the inside, but also a place to prop up that easel. I also have a mini note card that I made slightly smaller than our main note card. This is 4 by 5 1/4 inches. I put glue on the back of it and I'm adding it to the inside of our card. Now this time I decided to not add any texture to the front of that, just keep it plain. I stamped Thinking of You on a small circle die cut, added some extra circle die cuts behind it for dimension, and I'm gluing it to the mini note card so that it's positioned behind that lantern. So it's hidden behind the lantern when it's closed, but then when you open it up, this serves as a prop for your easel. I didn't add anything else to this except for a sentiment from that Happy Vibes stamp set, and I did that up at the top left of our frame. You can see here that it props up easily, and then you have the mini note card in the inside that opens up to hide your personal greeting so it doesn't show through that window opening on the front of the card. This again could easily be made into a spinning element. You just would need to use less flowers so there's room for it to spin. But I wanted to give you the option of not adding that spinning feature. You can use any open frame that you want to here, even create your own by using a large die cut window. Really, in so many different ways you can use this technique. So I hope you enjoyed the different techniques I shared with you today and this fun new interactive type of card. Be sure, again, to check out that other live that I did where we shared a lot more information. I had a special guest on it and she shared some great ideas too. If you're interested in anything I used today, including that free gift, it is linked in my YouTube description below. At the end here, I'll link to a couple other related videos if you're looking for more ways to stretch your supplies. Thanks for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon.